This was, I found interesting that it dropped sort of simultaneously. I mean, total coincidence. Here's a clip of Nina Turner. She's on with Robert Reich. I don't know if he has a podcast or what, but they were doing like a Facebook Live. And I don't know if there's another clip where she's more explicit about it, but she's basically saying like, look, there's a sequence to these things. And you got to get Donald Trump out. And there's only one way to do it.
Of the road, why should I bother?
I think for somebody like you and me, we would say to that person, "I'm going to accept what you're saying."
Pause
because I don't believe that.
Sorry. Just to set this up, Rice asked Nina Turner, "What if someone says, why should I bother voting? They are, the candidates are more or less the same. They're not going to help me. Why should I bother voting?" That's the question he gives to Nina Turner.
And I'm going to accept what you're saying because I don't believe that vote shaming works. I mean, that's for me. I just don't believe that you can talk down to people and tell them that they're wrong in how they feel. A lot of their feelings also, Doc, are rooted in real life examples. So it's not just a feeling. They also understand whether or not their material conditions have changed or the material conditions of their parents or their grandparents or their neighbors or their friends. I mean, right now, the millennial generation and some of the Z's on the older end, and when we say young people, I mean, we're really talking 45 years and younger. Some people, maybe not in that 45-year category, but in their 30s, have had to move back home with their parents. So through their lived experience, their material conditions have not changed much. But to say to them, clearly what you're feeling is real. But there is a way for us, the collective us, to take control. And you might not see the change immediately, but in a representative democracy, you get to voice your opinion through the vote. And that voting is only one part of the process. So what I say to people, Doc, I say, you mad as hell? Good. I still want you to go to vote. You disappointed about the two choices? Good. So am I. I still want you to get out there to vote. And then after you vote, that's only the first part of the process. We have to actively be engaged in our communities, not just on the federal level, but the state level. We got census, we got lines that are going to be redrawn, and also on your local level of government. So voting is the beginning. It is not the end. And you can get out there and we will fight like hell and hold people accountable. Because sometimes when we talk about voting, we don't say to the voter, you have a right and a responsibility to hold the people you elect to office responsible. And if they don't respond to you, then that's another conversation. But in this moment, we have two dragons to slay, but we got to slay neo-fascism first. Doc, and you and I talked about that a lot before.
Oh, well, she went on to say, we've got to slay neo-fascism first before we slay neoliberalism. And that means you've got to vote against Donald Trump. And there's only one way to do that in this election, and that is to vote for Biden. And I think, the bottom line is celebrating Donald Trump getting COVID doesn't necessarily get you any further down that line. And although I can understand why people are doing it in their homes, but in terms of celebrating, Donald Trump getting sick and whatnot, it doesn't do anything for you. I don't know that it necessarily hurts, but you could see it already where people are going I can't believe, how could people be so callous? How horrible that is. Mm. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Have you seen how he acts? I mean, Donald Trump was mocking Hillary Clinton when she got pneumonia. Right. But I don't know. It's
yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way of putting it, the way she contextualized it. I think, abstaining from voting in the presidential election is something I understand it a little bit more when people are coming at it from it's I have a character problem with this guy. Someone who's a sexual assault survivor who's just like, I just can't get over the character issue here. That I totally understand and sympathize with. And I sympathize with the other objections too. But like, I guess one thing to clarify, like I'm planning to vote for Biden. And, you know, I think one of the things that I'm a little bit confused by with some people on the left, it's definitely not like, obviously, of course, it's always exaggerated. The spoiler narrative is always exaggerated. But like, you know, when I talk to people on the left who aren't planning to vote for Biden, one of the issues that comes up for me is like, okay, look, there's this argument that voting can't fight fascism. And I understand where that argument comes from, but like, you didn't seem to believe that that was the case when Bernie may have been the nominee. So it's like in that case, right, like voting would have been at least a stave on, you know, rising fascist sentiment in the country. So like, why can't even theoretically, you know, like a
Right.
centrist Democrat do not the same degree of correction, but some degree of correction? You know,
I'm baffled by that someone can sort of like, you know, sincerely make that argument. Well, let me put it this way. I think Turner is right when she says there is no value, and it's just simply wrong in and of itself to deny the people's lived experience in terms of politics not providing for their material benefit. And even the argument that it's very possible, depending on how you're situated, that neither candidate is going to address your material needs. For a lot of people, that's the case. For some, it's undeniable that their material needs are going to be improved with a Joe Biden versus a Donald Trump. I mean, it's undeniable if you're a dreamer, let's say. It's undeniable if you're an immigrant. It's undeniable if you are a member of temporary protected status folks. It's undeniable, I think, if you're transgender. I think it's undeniable. I mean, it goes on and on and on, not even including the Supreme Court and other courts, et cetera, et cetera. But for a significant cohort of people, it's hard to imagine that Joe Biden in and of himself is going to make a material difference in someone's life. That's acceptable. But the fact is that, like, you know, there's also the years after Joe Biden that are relevant. And it may be the case that you can't fight fascism with a vote. Maybe. I sort of disagree with that theory, but it's also like impossible to argue that your voting is in some way going to increase the strength of fascism. Right. I mean, unless you vote for a fascist. I mean, like, you know, I just don't see how that argument works. That to me, and frankly, I think the number of people who are not voting because they have that attitude is probably pretty limited.
Yeah.
I think it's more likely there are people out there going like, I don't engage in politics because politics doesn't do anything for me. And I think that it's people have a case to make about that. But I think, like, you know, you can give up, but it's not going to get any better if you don't. I can assure you it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another, and I'm sure you guys have gone over this a lot on the show, but it's like, you know, yeah, that does always like need to be pointed out, where it's like, look, this isn't necessarily like a unified like left deciding not to vote. It's like, it's people from across the spectrum, independents who may not have like voted for anyone but Bernie Sanders, and just people being like pretty dejected feeling, which I totally get. You know, voter suppression factors into that. And, you know, and it's like, yeah, these concerns are real. Like, right, the concerns about Biden's history, like, are real and biting for people, especially who have, like, you know, who have lived through the consequences of the drug war, right? And it's like, you know, lived through the consequences of his policy decisions. So it's like, yeah, I think the way she puts it is great, because it's like, yeah, you can't deny the reality of this. Like, and painting everyone who, you know, is threatening to abstain from voting or will abstain from voting as like lazy or selfish or privileged, obviously like falls into like a really kind of gross narrative about like why people don't vote in general. But yeah, I mean, I think that for people who are genuinely arguing like, you know, like voting will not make a difference in principle, yeah, it's like, it's always hard for me to get on board with that. Like I feel I identify with it emotionally, honestly,
Right.
more than I agree with it, like intellectually.